All right, good evening. I would like to call to order the September 13th, 2023 Operations, Budget, and Fiscal Affairs Committee meeting. My name is Shayla Adams Stafford. I'm the chair of this committee and the District 4 representative for the Prince George's County Board of Education. The Operations, Budget, and Fiscal Affairs Committee, representing the board, has the responsibility of examining matters relating to school system operations, budgeting, and fiscal affairs. This includes overseeing the management and audit of functions within PGCPS, providing recommendations on fiscal, capital, and human resources, such as the board's operating budget, capital improvement program, staffing plans, and allocations. This school year, the committee seeks to continue working collaboratively with our PGCPS administration while also looking for ways to increase community participation in major considerations, such as the budget development process and capital improvement projects across our school district. I thank you all for being here this evening. We will now have introductions of committee members, starting with board members, administration, board staff, and all other guests. Again, I thank you for joining us this evening. Okay, and we'll start with our vice chair.
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Kenneth Harris, representing District 7 for the Prince George's County Board of Education. Happy to be here, excited for the work we're going to do this year. I now yield the floor to my colleague, Board Member Rout.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Jocelyn Rout, at-large board member, the newest board member to join this phenomenal board. It's just a pleasure to be here and working collaboratively with the school system as it relates to the success of our scholars, and without the scholars, their parents. So just really happy to be here. Yield the floor back to our chair.
All right, thank you so much. Ms. Guerrero, I'm sorry. We have administration to introduce as well. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Sharaska Coleman, Chief Operating Officer for Prince George's County Public Schools. Glad to be here.
Jason Washington, Associate Superintendent of Supporting Services, Prince George's County Public Schools. It's great to see everybody.
Good evening. I'm Michelle Winston. I'm the Director of Internal Audit for Prince George's County Public Schools.
Good evening. Lisa Howell, Chief Financial Officer.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kiba Baldwin, and I'm the Transportation Director. Happy to be here tonight.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Sean Matlock, Director of Capital Programs.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Will Smith. I'm the Project Management Supervisor for Department of Capital Programs. Good to see everyone.
And good evening, Shayla Taylor. I'm the Supervisor for Capital Programs.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jessica Guerrero. I am the Board Assistant for the Board Office.
Thank you so much. Ms. Guerrero, can you please call the roll?
Yes. Mrs. Adams Stafford.
Present.
Dr. Harris.
Present.
And Mrs. Rout.
Present.
All right, we have quorum.
Thank you. May I have a motion to adopt the September 13th, 2023 meeting agenda?
I move to adopt the agenda from September 2023. Where was it, the date?
September 13th.
September 13th, 2023.
All right. Second?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded to adopt the September 13th, 2023 meeting agenda. Is there any discussion? Well, I would like to recommend that we amend the agenda to include Dr. Coleman's updates on the opening of new schools and Ms. Howell's budget cycle updates. So let me rephrase that. I move that we update the agenda, amend the agenda to include Dr. Coleman's updates on the opening of new schools and Ms. Howell's budget cycle updates.
So move.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, opposed? All right, the motion passes and the agenda is adopted. May I have a motion to approve the August 23rd, 2023 meeting minutes?
Motion to approve the August 23rd meeting minutes.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the August 23rd, 2023 meeting minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, opposed? All right, the motion passes. The minutes are approved. Colleagues and administration and our staff, I'm really pleased to share that we have 9 registered public speakers this evening and 23 written public comments and 1 pre-recorded public comment. I'm really happy to see more community engagement and sharing of concerns on some of these core topics that we will be discussing. To our public speakers, you've been registered to speak in a public comment forum where the OBAFA committee will listen to your comments. The OBAFA committee will not address your comments. All registered speakers will have 3 minutes to make their presentation. Registered speakers may not relinquish any part of their speaking time to another registered or unregistered individual. Speakers may not address individuals or issues with profanity or derogatory terms. You will be warned once. If you continue, your comments will be muted and you may be removed from the meeting. Speakers are encouraged to use titles rather than names, for example, principal, superintendent, deputy superintendent, and your adherence to these guidelines will enable public participation to move smoothly. Our first speaker for the evening is Beth McKenzie, individual school bus shortage. Thank you. Ms. McKenzie? Beth, I believe you're muted.
I'm sorry, that I'm not Beth. Somebody, another different Beth.
Different Beth.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
So maybe I don't think you were.
So it seems she hasn't joined.
She must not have joined. Okay, we'll try to come back. Our next speaker will be Tris West.
He's not on either.
Okay. All right.
Josie is on.
Josie is on. Okay, our next speaker is Josie Skinner.
Hi, thank you so much for all you do for the county schools and for allowing me to speak. I am a parent of 2 children, kindergarten and 2nd grade at Robert Goddard Montessori. Our route for the morning is bus 466, for the afternoon 492. We have been told that we do not have a driver for this route. Morning bus 466 routinely gets the children to school at around 10 o'clock, sometimes after 10 o'clock. Today, my understanding is the bus did not show up at all. The arrival at 10 o'clock means that because our school starts at 9:15, 45 minutes of instructional time is lost. We receive messages from teachers emphasizing the importance of that first hour of school for getting children settled and establishing the day, and these children frequently arrive after 10 o'clock. That is more than 15% of the instructional time in the day. As I'm sure you know, chronic absenteeism is defined as any absence that's more than 10% of the school year, meaning that simply by riding the morning bus, these children are chronically absent in terms of the number of instructional hours they're receiving. For bus 492 in the afternoon, we do not receive notification of whether we have an assigned substitute driver that day. The children wait in the front hallway for an indefinite period of time. The vice principal and the principal are forced to stay sitting in the hallway, waiting with the children for the bus to arrive. They are given no information. We call the bus lot. We are given conflicted information or no information at all. Last week, one day, they arrived home at 6:30. 3 hours after school got out, after they sat for 2.5 hours in the hallway. We have not received helpful resolutions from the transportation resolution system. We've gotten emails that say things like, we are constantly making adjustments to our routes to improve our on-time arrival time. We've been told there's a bus driver shortage. I understand that Montgomery County does not have a bus driver shortage. And when I went and looked, I saw that the starting hourly wage for Prince George's County bus drivers is $18.78 per hour, which is significantly less than a livable wage in this county. And I would request that you make more effort to prioritize these salaries in the budget so that children can get to school on time and learn.
Thank you so much, Ms. Skinner. Next, we have Jane Noe Wiley, who is here to speak on as an individual on transportation.
Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity. August 28th was a day of first for us. It was the first time my oldest son would be attending a new school, the first day of being a third grader, and the first day he had ever boarded a school bus. We assured him that he could put his trust in the adults around him to get him safely, and that we would be waiting at the bus stop ready to welcome him back. But his drop-off time came and went, and my worry turned to panic and fear. That day he was dropped off more than 2 hours late, hungry, tired, and scared. The following day, my son was refused a bus ride home because his stop did not appear on the run sheet. The principal explained that bus drivers are not given the same run sheets as what SchoolMax reflects. He shared that this issue has been going on for years, and dozens upon dozens of families were similarly impacted. Some of these families were in the middle of their work shifts when they found this out. Some of these families had no access to transportation. And all of these children came home hungry, tired, and wary of whether in fact they could trust the adults around them. The situation has not improved since then. Despite updates to the system, the bus driver continued to use inaccurate information and refused to allow my son on the bus until just yesterday. But what could feel like a win is bittersweet. My son's bus route is one of the many who do not have a permanent driver. Yesterday, more than 2 weeks after this ordeal began, my just turned 8-year-old arrived home at 6:30 p.m. Again, more than 2 hours late. Once again, tired, hungry, and wondering if the adults around him are worthy of trust. We have written to senior district transportation officials 4 times now to gain some clarity, but we have been met with silence. Some of the questions we have posed include, when safety and communication are paramount during this critical transition time, why are bus drivers working off of outdated and inaccurate lists that do not match what parents, the school, or even the district transportation office sees? Why are systems not talking to each other? And how is there no ongoing feedback loop? And if this is a historical system-wide issue, why is there absolutely no communication from the district or school that parents should plan for an alternative way for children to get home until further notice? As a parent, I am asking that the district prioritize 1, accurate information that will be communicated and honored across the different transportation touchpoints. 2, transparency, building a dashboard and a messaging system to communicate driver status, affected bus routes, and other updates that give parents the information they need to plan and organize alternative arrangements. 3, new protocols for schools to communicate when buses have arrived and departed to replace a functionally useless Stop Finder app while a better solution is investigated. 4, an equity audit to determine who is being impacted by the system's failures, which schools, which neighborhoods, which routes, with an eye to ensuring our most vulnerable populations are prioritized. And 5, immediate deployment of alternative transportation methods to fill in gaps left by bus and driver shortages. Parents should be treated as assets and sought as collaborative partners to provide input. The call line representative I spoke to on that first day told me that they were doing their best. But I refuse to believe that this is our best. Our children deserve adults around them that have the commitment and urgency to create and sustain the conditions that they need to be successful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wiley. Our next speaker will be Mr. Patrick Paschal, individual on buses.
Good evening. My name is Patrick Paschal. I live in Hyattsville, and I have children that attend 2 Prince George's Public Schools, Hyattsville Elementary School and Glenarden Woods Elementary School. I'm speaking today about the bus issue, especially for my student at Glenarden Elementary School. I could regale you with stories, genuine, true horror stories of the ways in which the lack of communication has harmed our folks. But I just want to focus actually on solutions. Um, you know, what we need right now is communication. We need to know where our children are. If I can track my burrito every single inch from store to door, I should be able to figure out whether or not you're ever going to come pick up my kid. A group of 21 parents on our bus route, this is the AM 490, PM 193 bus, sent a letter to many of you on this call, superintendent, our school board representatives, a number of our elected officials. We sent this on Friday, indicating that 50% of the days of school so far, our children were not picked up in the morning. And we were never given an indication that our children would not be picked up. I didn't receive a response back at all until today. And that response from the superintendent was, we'll look into your issue. And then later, a response from the transportation department indicating, one, that we should use the Stop Finder app. I'll come back to that. Two, we should call the transportation depot for updates when the bus is late. This morning, I spent 18 minutes on the phone waiting for someone to pick up the line at the transportation depot. It then rang for 3 minutes. At the end of 3 minutes, the line went dead. I tried to use the Finder app. In fact, I tried to do this last year. I have never gotten an activation code. I can't get an activation code for reasons unknown. I do have my information in School Max. Every time I complain to your staff about it, they throw their arms up in the air and say, well, we don't understand. It's School Max. Meanwhile, my wife did get an activation code, so we know that it has never, ever once been accurate. Not once has it ever told us that a bus would come, whether or not a bus does come. We're asking not for you to magically resolve the problem around the bus drivers, but rather just to tell us whether or not you're going to come get our kids instead of leaving them stranded on a street corner when it's 95 plus degrees outside and the council has designated it an extreme heat day. One of the people in the transportation office had the gall to respond to me today and say, no, we don't cancel routes. They're just running late. See, we give up at 10 o'clock and drive our kids to school. So that's pretty ridiculous. I don't know how you guys got yourself in this position, given that we know that the bus transportation issue is recurring. And so while other people might be asking you to solve it now, I say shame on you for having not spent your time resolving it last year. But today, what we need from you is just to let us know whether you're going to pick up our kids. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paschal. Our next speaker is Joanne Washkak. And please, if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, please correct me. An individual speaking on transportation.
Thank you, Ms. Adam Stafford. Hi, thanks for the opportunity to provide testimony. My name is Joanne Wazak, and I am the proud parent of a PGCPS second grader and a council member for the city of Hyattsville. I'm going to focus my district's, my comments on the district's investments in technology and staffing to communicate with families about school bus service. I noticed in the approved budget that the transportation department is committed to utilizing modern technology to solve transportation service challenges, specifically to improve parent-school communication about transportation and to use GPS-based tracking systems and advanced tech-based routing systems. And this sounds great. I also see a line item in the budget for a software license, which I'm guessing supports the Stop Finder app. That line item was about $750,000 in fiscal year 21 and $500,000 in fiscal years since. And as America's 18th largest school district, it is great to see strong investments in modern technology. So in theory, this app, Stop Finder, is great for families and for the bus ops team because it should display an icon of your child's bus progressing along its route so that you can track the bus when it will arrive and pick up or drop off your student. Unfortunately, Stop Finder does not work for many parents. When I speak to parents in my community, they say that either Stop Finder shows no information at all about their child's bus, or they've never been sent a link to Stop Finder, even though they've submitted multiple tickets to get it. Bottom line, the district is not getting the expected return on this major IT investment. And I don't think we should have to implement workarounds when we spend $500,000 a year on StopFinder. But the transportation team has offered to do just that. They said, we'll answer our phone line to provide real-time bus updates. But they're not resourced to spend their mornings and afternoons answering the phone. So parents have been waiting on the line or getting disconnected. The budget shows that the transportation team has only one FTE employee focused on tech resources. So I'm advocating for 2 or 3 more FTEs in this job series to get StopFinder debugged and working correctly, because that will support the families and the bus ops team. I also want to recommend that you task staff with first determining the number of bus routes that are not appearing on StopFinder right now, and the number of families who can't see any information on StopFinder. And then ask those staff to analyze why we have those gaps, and then contact the vendor to address these issues because we pay them to do that. And lastly, I just want to humanize this issue by adding a couple impacts. On our bus route, 2 parents have quit their jobs because they haven't been able to get to work on time due to late or no-show buses. And obviously that's greatly impacted their economic stability and quality of life. Many other families have said that when the buses are a no-show, they have no one to drive their kids to school. And while we work to hire a more permanent set of drivers, I just want us to also improve communication about buses so kids have the best chance to get to school each day. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much. We will now hear from Ariana Chu, individual speaking on school bus transportation.
Madam Chair, Ariana Chu has not joined. We do have Beth McKenzie if you'd like for her to speak.
Yes, we can go to Beth McKenzie. Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Beth McKenzie, I'm the parent of 2 elementary school students at Capitol Heights Elementary School, and I'm talking about bus route 125. It has shown up, so I do feel a little bit lucky on that front, but it is, as it is scheduled, it will never get our children to school before the start of the day. So my child will be missing math class every single day. And so would really like for adjustments to be made for this so that our students can arrive to school to be on time and ready to learn, and think it's very important that our children have this opportunity, because right now we do have to take time out of our work schedule, and if we can't, then our kids are late and our kids are missing out on really important learning opportunities. Thank you very much for your time today. I will be short because I know you have a lot of folks talking, so thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll now have Megan Ritter, individual on bus driver shortages and bus driver pay.
Hi, thank you so much. I'll concur with Beth that after hearing some other stories, my initial thoughts and complaints are not nearly as serious when it comes to bus challenges. But I have a 3rd grader at Heather Hills Elementary School and a 7th grader at Benjamin Tasker Middle School. And I'm really here to advocate for an increase in pay for our bus drivers. It is my understanding that in both Montgomery County and Anne Arundel County, they are fully staffed with bus drivers, but they also pay significantly more per hour. And they've put that investment in. And I think that in PG County, it's been 2 years that we've had around 200 200 bus drivers that are not making the mark in us being fully staffed for bus drivers. Now, as a parent, when we go to all of the back to school events, right, everyone keeps talking about attendance and how attendance is so vital to having our kids be able to really learn and grow and try and catch up on everything they missed out during quarantine. But bus drivers are so key to that. Like everyone else, you know, our bus, even on the good days, my middle schooler gets to school 20 minutes late, and if her first class is math, and she's in a talented and gifted program, like she's missing out on very valuable stuff that they start off right away. Additionally, our bus stop is a mile away. And so I have to drive my third grader at 6:45 and then my seventh grader at 7:45 and then just hope the bus shows up. And that is because, and I have the flexibility of working from home, of having a flexible schedule and owning a car. So I know that I speak from a point of privilege on this, but would really echo what everyone else has said in that making an investment on our bus drivers and making an investment in the bus app would be key. Before we had the Stop Finder, there was another app that PG County used that was more effective. And I've yet to really have Stop Finder work in the past few years. So would just echo those sentiments. Because I think, again, if attendance really is important, then that starts with our buses and it starts with our bus drivers. And I'll just also say that we've given our bus drivers a really impossible task. And so even when things are working well, the bus drivers are stressed. And so my daughter gets on a bus that's running late and the driver is really stressed, and it's a lose-lose for everybody. So would just, again, advocate on really looking at bus driver pay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And our last speaker for this evening, unless is Tris West here? Okay, we'll have David. We'll have David Tansey, an individual on school buses.
Good evening. My name is David Tansey, and I'm here today to share my concerns about the school bus service my son relies on to get to school. He also attends Capitol Heights Elementary School's TAG program and takes the bus 125 from Cheverly in the morning. My son has not yet made it to school on time. More importantly, I'm not sure that he would have made it to school on time even if the bus had arrived at the time it is scheduled. It's scheduled to arrive at 9:02, 28 minutes before class starts. Even if there was no traffic and no other students to pick up, the bus would arrive with about 10 minutes to spare. Since it has both, it gets there after classes started every day, sometimes significantly after. I highlight this to make a point. Even some of the routes we say are fully functional aren't. When solving this problem, we have to take into account routes like my son's. This is another way of saying that we're probably short more drivers than is currently shared with the public. I'm frustrated that there haven't been press conferences about what the schools and the county are doing about this. Since there's so little communication, I don't know what is stopping us from resolving this. I don't know if our bus driver pay isn't competitive. If it isn't, we need to make it so. If there's something else that makes working here less desirable for qualified drivers, we need to fix that. If you're able to find some stopgap measures like hiring temporary drivers or chartering buses, do that. But the status quo is not an acceptable default. I won't speak to technology because other people have already said it. I agree with everything they said. Stop Finder is like better than nothing, but only because I've learned to kind of hack it. So it tells me where the bus is 10 minutes before it arrives by guessing where it'll be about 10 minutes before it gets to me. But it doesn't give me a live location of the bus. It just tells me it passed the metro X number of minutes ago. And also about communication, I was sort of shocked by what a previous person said about not being told that the bus is going to be hours late. That needs to be a top priority. Like I understand some things like contracts and whatever are hard to negotiate, but someone's job has to be to say, hey, your child is not coming home for a long time. We're doing what we can do about it. But those parents might say, you know what, if I have the means, I need to just start picking up my kid, because that's not an acceptable default either. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you all so much for your public comment. I hope that you'll be able to stay on for the duration of the meeting. I'm moving to item 2.1 for public comment from our labor partners. We have none. So we're going to move on to item 3.0, discussion and action items. So item 3.1 is transportation initiative to mitigate bus driver shortage. And so I will now yield the floor to our transportation director to share with us the efforts that are being undertaken at this time.
Thank you, Board Member Stafford. I have a PowerPoint that I would like to share with you just to give you some initiatives that we are utilizing to help mitigate our bus driver shortage. Again, thank you for the opportunity to share this. We're going to focus on 5 distinct areas: driver recruitment, driver retention, communication, routing, and transportation initiatives. Next slide, please. So the first is driver recruitment. This is a collaboration with our HR partners for hiring events, in-person and virtual. We do those bi-weekly. We have advertisements in the community, including hiring banners on our school buses to support the recruitment of our bus drivers and bus attendants. We do offer paid CDL training for all of our candidates. And we have a campaign that has been implemented targeting retired bus drivers for rehire. Our substitute bus driver pay has increased to $20 per hour. And we're doing prioritized hiring for candidates having a CDL already, so that when they do come in, we can get them through the process much faster than what we normally do. Next slide, please. The second focus is on our driver retention. Right now, we have an additional compensation program. These are drivers that are completing additional runs and they are compensated with added pay. So due to the shortage, drivers are doing extra runs. They may double, sometimes triple to come back and get a run that's vacant. We also provide the ongoing training with safety courses with first aid and CPR. We offer a nonviolence crisis prevention training for our staff on how to de-escalate situations on the bus between students. And then we have made the investments in technology to improve our bus safety. The biggest right now involves our stop arm cameras and security surveillance cameras installed inside and outside the bus. We do have GPS-enabled tablets that do provide turn-by-turn directions for our drivers that we're continuing to use and learn more about them. More about them. All right, next slide, please. The next is our communication. Very important. Ultimately, we have our TRS system, our transportation resolution system. This is our online tool for parents to submit transportation concerns. We have had additional staff that's dedicated to resolving these concerns. We offer up to a 48-hour turnaround for a response. We do get a lot of these since the first day of school. I think since we released our routes, we've had over 1,600 enter in our system to address. What's new is our webpage updates. Our parents can now view updates on our website. They can view it on the individual school website as to the routes that are vacant, that do not have an assigned driver. The next is our Stop Finder Bus app. This is the app that parents can track the location. One thing that I care to mention is that it does not provide a tracking system where it tracks the total path of the bus. It's based upon a geofence that a parent can set within the system. So once that bus crosses that geofence, the parents will be notified. This is something that's in continual conversation with the vendor and members of my team on how we can improve this. But we also have, we need families to link to this more. It is done by an email address located in the School Max Family Portal, in which we will send an invitation to the families. We do that weekly. Well, actually, we do it daily. And the link has an expiration date of 7 days. So on the 8th day, if someone has not activated their link, we review and resend the link again. And so we want families to link up. Currently, right now, we have only about 20,000 active accounts. So we would love to have more families on it. It helps us. And what we're trying to do, working to do, is making sure that the data that requires families to be able to track it is updated periodically, so it's accurate for our families to see. What is coming down the pipeline is access to our school messenger system. When this system goes online, we will be able to call our parents, email our parents, text our parents on the status of the bus. This is the opportunity that we're looking for, and I'm hoping that will gain more traction, because that allows us the opportunity to let you know what the status of the bus is. And so as soon as this system comes up, we will be able to give an implementation date, a start date for prior notifications. So I'm hoping this will be a big win. It doesn't solve our total solution, but hopefully this will make a big dent in this. The next is our routing plans. Please understand that this process goes on the entire school year. As long as we have students enrolling in our system, we will always look to maximize our routing. So some of the strategies that we use to combat that is we combine our runs based on student counts in order to decrease the number of open runs. We also look at the reduction of bus stops to increase opportunities for on-time arrival. And we are currently revising all run schemes based on driver feedback. And so that deals with everyday traffic. If there are road closures and the bus has to deviate for a certain amount of time, we can update that as long as the driver lets our team know. So it can run more efficient. So this is a fluid process. It changes day to day. And so we have to put ourselves in a better situation where the information flows with the changes that occur on a day-to-day basis. And finally, some of our transportation initiatives, some of the new things that we're looking toward, just based upon what has been allowed through the Maryland State Department of Education. So alternative vans, we are developing a transportation system with the use of vans for our McKinney-Vento families, our special education families, by hiring non-CDL drivers operating school system purchase vans. And hopefully what this will do is free up some of our bus drivers to help with the open runs. We're also looking to work with third-party vendors, third-party contractors, where we've finalizing an agreement to use a company to help transport McKinney-Vento students and our special education students. And these vendors must meet MSDE certification requirements. The third piece is the use of the PGC Public Works Department, the bus public transit system. This is a partnership that has been in place. Kids ages 5 to 18 can ride free as long as they show their school ID. Primarily our high schools, the bus has routes that passes, I believe, close to 16 of our high schools. And so that is a partnership that we want to keep and continue to work and invest in. And we're also looking at bus contractors, investigating the use of our bus contractors to help cover our open runs. So we are actively working on all of these initiatives to make sure that we're doing the very best that we can to bring, to get our students to school safely and timely. And with that, I will open the floor for any questions that you may have, and thank you for the opportunity to present.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, if you have any questions, I'll wait until you have a chance to answer your questions, to ask your questions first. Okay, while we wait, I'll just go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you so much for your presentation. I thank you for being here, Mr. Baldwin. And I want to just first acknowledge, number one, myself and other board members wrote in and asked for an audit of our transportation system. And I want to thank you and Dr. House for your prompt reply that we actually are undergoing an audit this year. I think that will help us reveal some of the root causes of some of these challenges. I also want to say thank you for continuing that partnership with the bus. As you know, a few years ago, we had asked specifically about forging a partnership with WMATA, and I know that the bus is a great resource to us. And I know you all have worked on expanding that partnership. And I also want to say, thank you for moving forward with that alternative transportation. And I do have some follow-up questions about that. So my first question is, how many school bus drivers do we have, and how many school bus drivers do we need to be fully functional?
Great question. So right now we have 963 drivers. We need an additional 200 to be fully functional, to match the number of routes we have in our system.
And what has been the outcome of the hiring events that you have recently had?
Well, they have been pretty productive. The goal is to try to bring in as many people as we can. Because this is a system and you have to meet certain requirements, screening wise, we may screen people out. They may not be qualified to obtain a CDL. So the goal is to bring in as many people as we can, hoping that we can get as many people through the screening process that are eligible to obtain their CDL license.
Now, are our screening processes more rigorous than other jurisdictions around us?
No, ma'am. This is a nationwide requirement. It's the same requirements that you would have in Virginia, in West Virginia, North Carolina, the whole gambit.
Okay. So I want to get some understanding, a little bit more understanding about I'm asking if you can give us a follow-up on the outcomes of the hiring events. So, when, maybe a table or a chart that says when the hiring event was and how many hires it resulted in. I'm also wondering if you can share a little bit more about our work with Stop Finder. How deep are we into this contract in terms of years? Is this up for renewal? Is this something that you're considering looking at another provider? Just given that we've received just so many complaints and challenges about Stop Finder, when will we be able to look at other options?
Great. So if I can, just to clarify, Stop Finder is included in a total price. So it's not a separate line item that we pay for Stop Finder. It is a software package that's included in our routing in our GPS system.
So it's possible for us to purchase something outside of that?
Yes, it is. I would caution because I would want it to be aligned with our routing system and our GPS system. So they have to be able to talk to one another.
So are the routing and GPS system going to be up for renewal soon?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, when will that be?
So we're looking at, I think we're in, is it year 3 or year 4? But as negotiations can occur within an annual side, we may be able to deviate from the current vendor to a new vendor if required.
Because it seems like we maybe need to renegotiate with them. We're not getting what we need, right? If I am just gauging by what my constituents are saying, maybe they need to provide us with some additional services, some additional training. We are a very large school system, so maybe maybe they're overloaded with the amount of requests from us. Maybe we need 2 separate servers or something. North County, South County, I don't know, but it seems like perhaps we either need to go back to the table there. But my question is just, if you could provide us with some understanding of when you'll be renegotiating this or looking into other options and just kind of what you're looking at, just so that we can know,
Yes,
is there
ma'am.
something better out there?
Yes, yes. So as you know, I'm a new director coming in.
Yes, we
In
know.
about 2 months. And so
Yes.
I have actually started my own audit and looking at our systems. And I've been fortunate enough to work with several different routing systems, GPS system, parent systems. And so I am under my own purview reviewing what has happened in terms of the implementation, in terms of the professional development, and any other data that's associated as to why we are in the situation that we are in right now. And so this is something I'm hoping I'll be able to provide some feedback to Dr. Coleman and Superintendent House, but also, and thank you for mentioning this, the audit that Superintendent House has agreed to come in. I'm hoping they will be able to share some feedback as to the path, or as a result of what's happening now, some strategies that we can use to better ourselves, and even looking at some priorities. If we decide to move away from the Stock Finder app, we can identify certain priorities to look at for future apps, so that we know what we're getting and it's productive for us and our families.
I'm going to ask two things. I'm going to ask if you can please reach out to the families that spoke this evening to be a part of that audit committee. And I'm just going to ask for folks in central office to go out to the bus stops with some of these families to kind of gain some, some empathy and experience of what it's like and kind of what's happening on the ground. Just another question. Do we have some distribution data on late buses in terms of where are most of the complaints coming from? Like, where do we have just like a map just giving us some idea of hot spots? That would be, where I would wonder if we could strategically deploy some of these alternative vehicles. And then I have a follow-up question on communication. Can you all provide families with a daily list of buses that are inoperable or routes that are not working? And this could be by form of just a blast on the website where parents can go and it can just say, this is where we are today. Just giving a very clear picture of which routes are not working this morning, every morning.
That is, to answer your latter part, that is a hot topic that I'm working on right now. And to be able to provide the focus point, that's kind of where the school messenger piece comes in, because that gives us the first opportunity to share with our families first thing in the mornings and in the afternoons. The second thing is we'll be working to actually post it to see if we can post something like that on our webpage, so families can see at an earlier time. So if they need to make adjustments, they will have enough time to make those adjustments. But I agree. All of those things that you just mentioned are things that I'm working on right now to be able to share with our families.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm going to yield. Did any of my colleagues have any other questions? I don't want to monopolize the time here.
Dr. Harris's hand was raised before.
Sorry. Dr. Harris, you can go ahead.
Hey, yeah, thank you. Just a few questions from me, and I want to again target the technology side of this. Mr. Ball, you spoke a bit about a messenger system that's going to be up and running for Stop Finder in the near future. Did you give a tentative date for when that's going to be available for families?
I'm sorry, sir. I missed the first part of your question.
Sorry, let me turn my video off. Maybe it'll be a little easier. I said earlier you spoke about a messenger system that's going to be up and running soon for our families in addition to or on the Stop Finder platform. Did you give a tentative date for when that'll be available? Okay.
I'm trying to grab a date right now. I'm depending on some of our partners as they're helping me bring this to life with School Messenger. So if there's something I can follow up, I'm really hoping that I could have this up by next week.
Okay. Now, when using that on Stop Finder, was there an additional cost to adding that functionality to the platform?
No, sir. So School Messenger is not part of the Stop Finder application. It's
right. I'm sorry. I follow that. Was there an additional cost to the integration of those apps into a combined platform? Because I know they're two separate platforms?
Right. I'm not sure of the costs because School Messenger is not part of my department. It is already in use in the school system. Our
Right.
schools have access to be able to send messages to their families. So
Yeah.
we're just tying in to that system already.
Okay.
I can find out and let you know. if that's
Understood.
okay.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. And I guess lastly for me, I know we're tied in a way to using Stop Finder because of I guess compatibility when it comes to either the routing or the GPS system that you did mention. Now, again, from my perspective, it seems like there's a problem with end-to-end data flow, just from the perspective of the infrastructure of the app itself. From a risk management perspective, it kind of seems like it'd be easier to try to find a more efficient app or more efficient routing and GPS system that doesn't come with that as strict of a compatibility issue, I imagine. I know we talked a bit about contracts and when to be renewing, and I know things are coming up. So I do want my colleagues in the community to know that I think that's definitely something that we want to be pushing for if we're having these infrastructure issues and end-to-end data flow issues when dealing with stuff as simple as, are we going to be picking up the children that morning, or what time we'll be dropping them off in the evening. So no, I thank you for your responses here. I'll follow up with some additional questions second round, probably. Thank you.
All right, Board Member Rao.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, for allowing me to speak, and thank you, colleagues, for your questions, because I definitely had some of those questions written down. I also want to thank our transportation director for really being, just 2 months in. I get it. You're trying to take the reins, and I highly respect, the presentation today, because I definitely think that it gives parents a vision of and a little bit of glimpse of hope. The reality, what struck me today in hearing some of the concerns is safety. And I've said that a couple times before when we have been talking about transportation. As a working single parent, I can empathize when you gotta go to work, but your child is standing on a bus stop and you have no idea when the bus is going to come. I'm actually in a situation myself where I have a special needs child that cannot fathom and understand why he isn't being prioritized, because he's been told all this time that he has special needs and he has this bus and da 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 da. And so my question to you is, what can we do immediately for our special education students and for our younger children that are very vulnerable? I would never put my 5-year-old on the bus, if I'm what are some realistic things that we can do and implement over the next 2 to 3 weeks to be able to get our children to school?
Well, we've been talking about a lot. It really goes back to grassroots and looking at maybe sharing with our schools, calling our schools and letting them know what buses are late, and then possibly having our schools send those messages out. But as you know, we have a lot of vacant runs per school. And so my team works very hard in the morning to be able to put together what that picture will look like in order to cover all the runs, and then to be able to send those messages out. We're working with some additional staff to be able to do that on behalf of the bus lot. Because I empathize with all of our families. As a parent, I want to know where my kids are. And so that's a priority for me to make sure that we can do it. And I'm just trying to make sure that it's going to be effective and it's going to be impactful and meaningful when we roll this out. So I don't want to miss anyone. And so the immediate need is just calling folks. And if we call our schools, and sharing the information at schools, because right now that's how I can push information out until I can get the other system, School Messenger, implemented for us in transportation. The next thing is partner with our families. I think this is our time where we need to come together as family members in the community and help one another out where we can. If it means staying and trading off to stand at the bus stop, if you're able, obviously, to wait with kids, and then having a viable resource to be able to call into our system. We have taken on additional staff in my communication phone banks team. So those phone calls that you're calling and you have to get the automated message and you wait, hoping that that wait time will be reduced by the additional staff that we've brought on to help answer those phone calls, to be able to share. They have GPS capability at their workstations, so they can look up the bus. If you're able to share the route number, the school and the route number, they can look the information up and share with you. But understand that we've been getting a ton of phone calls daily. We're averaging about 1,400 calls daily, and to handle that with the staff that I have, it takes time. It takes time, and so patience is what we ask, and we're gonna get better, and we're getting better already. It's just not enough to make a dent for everyone to see. So.
And thank you, if I could just add, and thank you for those comments, Director Baldwin. In addition to that, within this month, we have identified funding, grant funding through the MVP office that will be utilized to immediately put third-party contractors on the road to support identified MVP students. Every student or group of students that we can route using those third-party contractors will free up a bus that can then take on some additional students in our system. We also are, Director Baldwin has been condensing routes over the course of the past month to a degree where to put numbers to it, on August 25th, we had 217 open routes. By September 13th, we're down to 196 open routes. And so they're continuing to look for efficiencies. So because we know we don't have drivers, can we collapse the route and still get the students to school safely and on time? And so that process is ongoing. And I know that is providing some relief, perhaps not for everyone, but some relief is being provided. The final thing that I want to just add is, I know we've mentioned Superintendent House's outreach for a third-party audit, and we're very excited that third-party audit's going to be conducted, because it's a set of fresh eyes that'll be able to provide one, a fact-finding and analysis regarding our transportation service as it's currently constituted. Two, to be able to evaluate the efficiencies for performance as well as equity, because I heard equity earlier this evening. And ultimately, it will produce recommendations for how transportation service can be optimized and differentiated. And that is immediately as well as long-term. So his commitment, Superintendent House's commitment, is to have that transportation audit completed within the span of his 90-day plan. And so we will have that set of recommendations after that 90-day period to be able to then move and see what can be acted upon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman.
Thank you, Dr. Coleman. That was a very comprehensive answer to my question. To piggyback off what was presented, what are the staffing gaps for our transportation call center? And then, yeah, what are those gaps? How many more transportation call center employees or FTEs do we need?
To date, I am still 10 staff members down for our call center.
Okay.
We are actively, I was going to say, but I also will say that Human Resources has been working hard to staff, because we are allotted as a school district temporary phone center staff members, because we know that every year there's going to be an influx of calls as families need support to get their children routed on the buses properly and to get the answers that they need. And so if I look at the data On August 18th, we had 7 additional staff members. By today or yesterday, we were up to 21 call center staff members, so that we can more robustly respond to calls from the time it's open at 6 a.m. to the time it closes at 6 p.m.
Have we considered maybe training or looping in the personnel that work in the front offices to be able to tap into these transportation systems to be able to give us more, I'm gonna say soldiers, to be able to deploy the information back and forth from the parents? What I'm hearing from the parents is there's long wait times, and I understand we're working on that. But as a second layer, have we thought about using our front office staff to be able to be trained in the systems that we can access to? So the same GPS tracking capabilities, the same capabilities that our call center staff would have.
We share information. We actually share information to our schools to provide bus stop locations, bus stop assignments, not necessarily access to the GPS system. From that standpoint, we understand that our front office folks have other tasks, school tasks to do, and at times this may be a daunting task to, I wouldn't want to flood the school with phone calls to school staff when they're trying to do their school responsibilities as well. That makes for a daunting task for front office folks, from firsthand experience, speaking from firsthand experience. So having access to be able to share the bus stop locations for families has been very good for our schools. It's helped us out from that standpoint, but having access to GPS systems that may flood their school more, and it may be more of a disruption than a solution.
I would like to see us, really look into that suggestion of really cross-training our front desk staff. They're getting the calls already. Because I know in a couple cases where parents have called me in the morning as early as 6:45, they on hold on this phone, they're trying to reach somebody on this phone. And so they may be getting those calls already, and it would just help with streamlining. So just opening up access. My additional question.
Board Member Rao, did you want to take I want to ask a few, and then I was going to come
Sure,
back to you
go
for the
ahead.
second round.
Go
Okay.
ahead. Second.
Just what I wanted to mention here is I'm going to ask several questions, and I'm just going to ask if you can try to condense your responses to the team, just because we do have some other items to move through. And you may, if you need to get back to us, I would like to talk about this also at our board meeting coming up next week. One thing regarding staffing, my question is, with the call center, are they collecting data on the locations that people are calling from in sort of specializing in that particular area? So for example, do we need to establish a call center for different areas of the county? I mean, just trying to see how can we do engage in that in a more efficient way. So that's just one question that I have. And I don't know if you've considered working with a staffing agency. I'm not clear on what we're doing there. So with the vans, can you please explain to me how many vans we're looking at? I think I heard that we have 16 vans. Are all 16 of those vans for the specialized groups that you're transporting, or is this through the third-party contractor, or is this on top of the vans that you have for the third-party contractor?
So we do have 16 vans that will be purchased by the school system. So these will be owned and staffed by our non-CDL drivers. So the third
do you have enough? And those, oh, I'm sorry, excuse me.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Those are going to be used by the contractors?
No, ma'am. This will be by school system staff, PGCPS staff.
And where will they be deployed?
They're going to be deployed where needed. We associate it by bus lots, but again, they're going to focus on the McKinney-Vento students and special needs students. These vans have a capability of no more than 10 people. And so we're looking at where we can take students that are far out, but require a bus, but it may only have 2 students listed on the bus. Those may
Yes.
be students that we can actually load in the van and bring them to school. And that's how we free up that bus to serve.
Yes. I think I'm unclear. So the McKinney-Vento students are with the third-party contractor and they have their own buses, or the McKinney-Vento students are using the 16 buses that we have purchased?
It's going to be both. Okay.
Okay.
So let me provide some clarity.
Understand.
We have a procurement that's been done for 16 alternative transportation vans. That procurement's already been taken care of. We're waiting for the buses to be completely built and then outfitted with the camera systems, GPS. So their target date for delivery is January, I'll say, but then they won't be outfitted, April. They won't be outfitted and ready to go until April, May, right? Those are the 16 that we've procured that due to supply chain, it takes time for them to be built and delivered to us. That is separate from the third-party contractors, which we've secured through the McKinney-Vento office, that we're going to be able to get up and running. And they use cars, they use vans, they use alternative vehicles, and that will begin in September of this year.
Okay, so how can we get more of those third-party contractors? April is way too far away. We cannot wait until then. So what is our plan to have more partnerships with the McKinney-Vento third-party type partnership?
So we are exploring all options. Again, the reason we were able to move immediately with the third-party contractor for the MVP students was we have a grant of funding that is identified, and we're able to move forward. As far as the alternative transportation vans, we were able to identify lease purchase funding that we were able to utilize to purchase those vans. And so we have to make sure that we have the funding in place. We have to make sure that all of the variables work. And again, some of this is going to come out, some of these recommendations are going to come out as a part of the audit, and how we can build in better efficiencies, take advantage of other options to meet the needs of all of our families.
So I guess how many McKinney-Vento vans are there?
Well, it's a third-party contractor, so it's not a part of our fleet. The difference is the 16 vans that Director Baldwin spoke to.
I think I understand that.
Us.
But how many vans will the McKinney-Vento group be? How many vans will be in operation?
So because it's a transient population, the number of third-party contractor cars and vans that are needed is going to vary.
Okay. I mean, I'm going to ask, I have a few recommendations, but what we need those third-party contractors that are able to start immediately. We need a list of those by next week, to be honest, because when I understood that their 16 vans were purchased, I was under the impression we were going to be able to put those in operation very quickly. But what I'm hearing you say, and thank you for this clarification, Dr. Coleman, because it requires this outfitting, because it requires that, it won't be available until April. And so would it be possible for you all to develop just some sort of timeline that will share with us some sort of, basically a list of, maybe 10 contractors that could start immediately, but like immediately as in September, and what's our status with each of those? And then I would want to know where they would be deployed. And my suggestion will probably be to deploy them in areas that we're having, a lot of challenges based on the data that we're receiving from the call center and Stop Finder, in addition to students that are special needs that have longer routes.
Sure. So we certainly do appreciate that. The issue is we have to go through a process to identify even funding to support something like third-party contractors. We've identified third-party contractors too, as a matter of fact, that are going to be working with our MVP students. We've identified the funding source that will be able to support the use of that service, but we don't have readily available funding to support 10 different contract groups that can be deployed across the district to make up for the 200 routes that we are short.
So my question is, how much funding do you need for one contractor to do the work? How much is the
So the funding is,
contract from McKinney-Vento?
I think it would be helpful, Director Baldwin, to just talk a little bit about the cost structure of the third-party contractors just in general, so that the public can get a sense of what that looks like.
Understood. So generally speaking, based on the need, the number of students, location of those students, working with the third-party contractors, they have a working formula based on miles. So there's an initial administrative fee just for the use of the car. And then based on the routing that is done by the third-party vendor, and with recommendations from our routing team, depending on how many students they can get, 3 to 4 students in a car, and based on that route, by miles is how they would charge us. So we are looking to be able to put as many students in the vehicle together, if possible, to transport obviously to the same school or schools in the same region with similar start times, if needed, traveling to school.
Madam Chair, can I please ask what does it cost for this MVP contracted service?
Sure, go ahead.
Student.
Right.
Sure.
What is the estimated cost per student?
Right now, it really depends on the mileage between where that student resides and to the school. So there's a base admin fee of about $75.
So what I'm trying to get at is if we need additional funding, the board, we need to do our due diligence and allowing the school system the resources it needs in order to solve the issue. So when we talk about funding, what is the funding gap? We know we have this grant. We know we have other needs. We know we have plans, future plans. What is the funding gap? What is that magic number that we need?
Well, it's hard to say right now, ma'am, just because we haven't started and we don't know how many students we will have to serve. There's a starting point right now with our MVP families, but we know that number will increase throughout the year. So it would be more of an umbrella, a general amount. And that I would not be able to share at this moment. I would want to go back and pull some history of our transportation costs that we've done in the past, and then be able to give you a number. That's something that we have looked at, but to give you a good number, I'm going to need to kind of pull some history and get back to you on that if I'm able, if you allow me to do that.
Absolutely. The board, we want to be a part of the solution. And so if there is a gap, we need to know the number so that we can be able to see if that's the pleasure of the board to provide or go out and advocate for additional funding.
So I'm actually going to make a motion here. So I'm going to move that we recommend to the full board a few items from our discussion here, because I know we need to move on to some other topics. I move to recommend that the transportation office provide the full board a timeline on the alternative transportation plan, basically a plan for the alternative transportation, which would include a cost amount for 10 additional transport contracts in order to provide micro transit, basically, using the alternative directive in the education code. So I also would include in that recommendation that the school system provide us with a hiring dashboard, matrix, table, some type of information regarding what efforts they have and outcomes of those efforts. I would also like for us to have information on when the audit will be taking place. Like what day will that begin, or what day, or when are you all going to begin the audit? And then lastly, in regards to communication, I'd like to know, so for example, when will parents begin to receive daily communication on all bus routes? So that could be on the website, that could be on School Messenger, that could be on Gov Delivery, but I'm recommending that the school system provide parents with a daily communication method to determine what is happening with their child's bus. Jessica, I don't know if you got that, but I can try to say it again.
Yeah, could you just repeat the general sense of the motion?
I was going to say, I move that the OBAFA committee recommend to the full board that the school system provide a plan for the alternative transit, which would include a timeline and a cost analysis for 10 micro transit or contract transit, somebody help me. I thought I knew what I was going to say here, but contract transit opportunities. And I recommended that the school system provide a detailed explanation of when the audit will take place. And I recommend that the school system provides some sort of data or metrics on hiring in terms of the outcomes of our hiring events. And then a recommendation that the school system provides some sort of timeline as to when families can expect to have full communication on bus routes daily, either via the website, School Messenger, Gov Delivery, what have you.
Can I make an amendment?
Yes.
I'd like to add something in there about identifying alternative means for stop finder with the GPS coming up.
I accept that.
And the second thing would be the thought process behind identifying 10 contracts. Is that limiting? Is that too many? Is that too few? Should we remove the language around how many it should be?
I just don't want to have like one, so I would say at least 3.
Whatever you're comfortable with, maybe no more than or no less than. No less than maybe. I think we lost you. I can't hear
Your
Shayla.
audio is low.
I said no more than 10. That's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Were there any other amendments? Colleague Brown, I saw your hand up.
No, not at this time.
May I ask who seconded the motion?
No one.
I don't know if she misheard the question. I'll second the motion.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Adam Staff, you also have the student board member on the meeting.
Yes, I did. Hi, Ms. Rivera Forbes. So it's been moved and seconded. Was there any discussion on that motion? Okay, hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the motion passes. Okay, thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to having some more information about those topics coming soon. So what I'd like to do now is move to an operations moment with updates on the opening of new schools to Dr. Coleman, our chief.
You're coming in and out, Madam Chair. We
I'm
really.
sorry, and that's the change. Taking the video. Okay, sorry. Now yield the floor to Dr. Coleman, our Chief Operating Officer, and his team will provide an update on the opening of our 6 new schools.
Good evening, Board Committee Chair Adam Stafford, board members and members of the community. We are grateful for the opportunity during the operations moment for the Department of Capital Programs to be able to provide follow-up from this month's Capital Improvement Program, or CIP, hearing, and then focus on the steps being taken to support, steps being taken as a result of the CIP hearing. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Capital Programs Director, Mr. Matlock, who will introduce his team and then present.
Good evening, Chairwoman Adam Stafford and the rest of the OBAFA committee. I'm going to, at this point, introduce Shayla Taylor and Will Smith. Ms. Taylor is going to give you the follow-up on the meeting from last week. Shayla? I'm sorry. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. She had to leave.
You may have dropped off. Yeah.
I think we dropped her. Okay, well, in that case, let me go to the documentation. I'll do it myself. So just give me a moment. We have it. Follow up. Hold on, just give me a moment. Well, we had a number of questions that came up. Initially, the first question that came up was around the schedule for the phasing schedule was requested by Mr. Harris for Suitland, which I think we provided that phasing schedule. There was another set of requests around the meeting that we had on the hearing for the CIP. That had almost 600 participants, roughly 29 people signed up for the meeting. We had a lot of questions, mostly around 3 primary areas. One was new construction under the P3, which we had a lot of very positive responses. Also, questions about the second phase of the P3 and union participation in that. And then we had other conversations around the conditions of buildings and trying to move some of those buildings up and some of the communication around that. There are a number of responses. We've gotten those, and we are in the process of putting that into a matrix, which will be submitted to the OBAFA committee shortly. We had roughly 5 new schools open this fall. Those 5 schools were all middle schools, that being Hyattsville Middle School, Sotomayor Middle School, Walker Mill Middle School, Drew Freeman Middle School, and Kenmore Middle School. We're having next week will be the ribbon cuttings for all those schools. I believe there's a schedule for that's been provided. And they're in really good shape. They were delivered on time and on budget, and they're in really great shape. I'm very proud of those schools. I think Mr. Washington should be too, since he led the effort in that regard, making sure that we got the P3 done. He did a wonderful job there. We had a number of summer projects that we completed this summer. I have Mr. Smith who can give you a quick summary on that. Will?
Yes, good evening. We had approximately 145 projects that was actively in construction this summer, all of kind of broken out either between ongoing construction that is part of a multi-year phase delivery approach, some that were specific to summer construction by themselves, and some are associated with just new replacements or renovations of major schools. We're going to be presenting an overview of that entire program in the October OBAFA meeting, and we'll be presenting that, the summary of all of our projects, kind of pictures and illustrations of the work that was put in place, and timelines associated with those projects.
Thank you, Will. One of the best things about our summer program this year is that we had almost no impact on school opening. Everything got completed on time, and all schools opened on time with no hiccups. So with that, I'll conclude my remarks.
I'll now open the floor, colleagues, if you have any questions. And my camera is off because I'm having some sound issues, but I'll try to come back on. Colleagues, did you have any questions?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just wanted to get a better understanding of what were the issues with regard to the delays. Was it permitting? Was it not enough supply chain? What were the delay? Where can we understand what happened?
I don't think we had any delay.
So the sixth school is not ready, correct?
Oh, the fiscal.
Colin Powell, that is land condition. That was not, that was tied to having to remediate soil issues, but that was not tied to supply chain delays, etc. So that was done to ensure solid foundation for the school, and it will be opening this fall as well. But all of the other schools were opened on time for this school year.
Thank you for the clarity. That's a big question.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking of it as a delay because it was land conditions, which technically we take responsibility for.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
That was my only question, Madam Chair.
Yeah, no, I thank you so much. I wanted to see the follow-ups from the First of all, I just want to say I was really happy that we had over 600 people on our recent CIP hearing. That was a pretty big number. And, thank you to the teams for helping to get that information out. That's the goal of our committee, is to have more community involvement. I wanted to know if there were the follow-ups to those questions, where people can find those follow-ups.
Well, unfortunately, our website is not our new website's not ready yet due to some of the issues we've had with the cyber attack, but it will be ready in October. We'll start putting a lot of those responses up to those questions. In addition, I know you had asked for a study on the change order reports.
Yes.
And that I believe is being provided to you in written form. We do, and we were only able to go back 6 years because we can't access some of the drives again due to the cyber attack. But we do have a 6-year study that will that's being provided to you in Excel, so you have that information.
Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to receiving that report so that we can involve DPI as well in the discussion and sort of have a robust discussion. Additionally, speaking of the cyber attack, I know that many of my colleagues are interested in talking about that from an operations standpoint. So I'm hoping that in some of our future meetings, we can make that one of our topics, and I know my colleagues will appreciate that. I had a quick question regarding the new 6 new schools. I was wondering if Mr. Washington could speak a little bit. Is he still on? I'm sorry, I'm not able to really see very well from him.
Yes.
Mr. Washington, if you could speak a little bit to the school-based health clinics and the community spaces that are in the new schools. This is something that the board has been very interested in. A lot of community members have wanted to know more about those spaces, how they're going to be used, and maybe if you can just provide us with a little update there.
So each of the schools has a fully fitted out community health clinic attached to them. They are external to the school. They are set up to be operated by an outside vendor. Currently, and I think they went out with an RFP last spring, but it was reissued. The Office of Health, PGCPS, went out with an RFP seeking vendors to perform and to utilize the spaces in conjunction with the health department. And they went back out because there were some local entities that were not contacted to respond. I do not know the status of that RFP. That really is going to be run by the Department of Health. Because there is grant funding from the state that comes in to supplement, and I know that is one of the legislative priorities. I believe either last session or this session for the county is to get additional money for community health clinics. When they are up and running, the idea is that they will provide community access to whatever that provider is providing. So, for instance, the theory behind this is if you are in communities that have a high propensity for asthma, you would then have a provider providing those services at the school. And so that you would then have the opportunity to really address some of those root causes that are causing students, unfortunately, to miss class and to higher incidences of attacks, etc. So that's the thinking behind localizing the clinics in the communities. But there's no restriction of what will be provided. So let me be very clear: it's whatever the vendor is selected. Also, we've been told that each school may not utilize their clinic. So it literally just depends on the interest and the ability for them to enter into an agreement with the Department of Health to provide those services. But I will say they have been built, they have been fitted out. They have exam rooms, they have, and so they are very nice, and we look forward to welcoming a vendor in. Just from a security standpoint, because this was a question that communities had, there is no access into the school from the clinic. You will have to leave, come back out, and go through the secured vestibule. There's no access by school personnel except for select few to get into the clinic. And we will be able to get in to clean it, provide maintenance, but that's it. And so it's really meant to amplify our impact on public health and for communities to start viewing the schools as community centers that are doing everything we can to address the needs of our students and the community.
Well, thank you so much. That's really encouraging to hear. As you know, this was a very big passion of mine last year to ensure that we did get our school-based health clinics up and operational, and to know that it's moving forward. And I had a chance to see it outfitted at Kenmore. I know that it's going to benefit us greatly. I know that we want to get our students to have their vaccines, students to have access, and their family to have access to healthcare. And so anything that the board can do to raise awareness of these clinics with community members, please let us know how we can partner with you on that, so those spaces can be used to their full capacity. So if there are no other questions on
Madam
this,
Chair.
oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't see the hands. Sorry, go ahead, Dr. Harris, and then we'll.
Yellow. It's,
Okay, yeah.
I don't know how to change it to brown. I'll figure it out. Yes, thank you. So with regard to the CIP hearing, we heard a lot about cooling and heating systems. What are we doing as we are entering in a change of season? I know it's not much we can do about our heating system. I mean, our cooling systems, because we're going into a cooler time, which is my favorite time of year. I love fall. So what are we doing to prepare ourselves for the heating systems?
So there's I believe the changeover occurs in late October, if I'm not mistaken, and that's done by building services, but they do change over the systems. Most of our systems that are their heating and cooling issue stated. So if we have an older system that's having some issues, it's still going to have some issues, but for the most part, we try to make sure that we're providing is functional systems at this point. They may not be optimal. Of course, as you know, one of our largest expenses that we have for our department is upgrading HVAC systems, not just the ones at the new schools, but the ones at schools that may not get anything done to them for a while out. So we have a number of projects that are right now in process, and we have a bunch of them on the runway to update HVAC systems.
As a follow-up, is there a plan to provide alternative heating mechanisms? I just know no.
It's so if you think about a building, and Dr. Harris probably knows this probably better than I do, but if you think about a building, it has an envelope, right? And there's a certain amount of pressure that you have in it to keep it properly heated and cooled. It's tied to the windows, it's tied to the buildings, the return and air systems within the building. And so you can't heat and cool ad hoc. You have to do it from a holistic standpoint. And so it's very difficult to just bring space heaters into a room and heat part of the building. It just won't work. And these are large spaces, voluminous spaces that you have. They're not as intimate as you might have at home. So no, when we do a fix, it's to the entire system. We might replace univents, so that's some of the older univents, and that happens when they wear out, but that's more of a maintenance system issue. But we do that sometimes. But that when we do it, it's like 20 or 30 at a time or something like that.
Okay, and then transitioning over to the health clinics, will dental and mental health services, will that be included in some of those localizing services, or is it just physical health?
It will be physical and I believe mental, and I also think that they were opening possibility to some telehealth as well. So making basically utilizing the space as much as best we can. But it will not be dental. Dental coverage will not be provided within those spaces.
Thank you for the clarity.
Yep.
And who will staff? Will it be a vendor that will staff? Okay, so there's
and
no
they will
way
be
that we
they will
can-
be compensated based upon whatever contract they
the
enter into.
contract. So there's no way that we could utilize some of those spaces to provide internships to any of our students who are in CTE programs.
We can look into it. I mean,
Please.
I definitely think that, we can look into it, especially it's on the school property. I don't know any vendor that would say that I could see saying no to that option. But when we know that someone has been identified, we can definitely bring that to the table, and that's something that we can raise with the Department of Health as well on the county side. That we would like that opportunity for those type of internships and externships for our students.
Yeah, our students should be able to start here at home to be able to get, their experience. Madam Chair, I don't have any additional questions. Thank you.
Dr. Harris, do you have any questions?
Yeah, one question for me. The first is a comment speaking directly to the centers, and thank you for bringing that up, Board Member Rout and Mr. Washington. It'd be interesting, or I'd like to also include local level city leadership in the discussions around helping to fill those facilities, can utilize them as well. I know we've got a lot of concern and also interest in helping the school system in that regard, so it'd be good to include them, and I can make those connections if needed. And then lastly, just to piggyback on my colleague, Ms. Rout again, and Dr. Madlock's conversation around the thermal envelope of the buildings. I'm glad to hear that we're trying to make some custom approaches to things like that. Like you said, it's a number of variables that go into it: window size, the material that the building's made out of, exit points, things like that. So I'm glad that we're thinking through that as we again transition seasons to make our students as comfortable as possible and to have them in that educational environment. So thank you. That's all from me. Chair, back to you.
All right, thank you. I'd like to move now to item 3.3, the budget moment updates. And I will yield the floor now to Ms. Lisa Howell, our Chief Finance Officer, to provide us with an overview of the budget cycle.
Good evening, everyone. I thank you, Board Chair Adam Stafford, good evening, board members and community members. I am going to try to get through this as quickly as possible. I know we've been in this now for almost 2 hours, and so certainly if there's additional questions later on that need to be addressed, I'll be happy to do that. Will the presentation be shared, or do I need to share my own screen?
Yeah, if you'd like, I can share for you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So you can go to the first slide. So our overall budget cycle or budget process consists of 3 different cycles. We have our proposed cycle where we develop the foundation of our budget that really serves as the basis for the rest of the budgeting process. We develop our initial revenue projections for the coming year, and that is based on September 30th actual enrollment for the current year. So our current year enrollment that we're about to finalize will serve as a foundation for our revenue that we're establishing or projecting for fiscal year 2025. The enrollment changes will also determine the level of funding that we need to set aside for our school budgeting process, which won't begin until the spring, but we still go through a process to allot a pot of money that will be utilized for budgeting at our school levels. We use our enrollment growth year over year just as a proxy. There is a very detailed enrollment projection process that's done by the accountability team that we utilize when we get later in the year. But as a proxy, we need an estimate to be able to determine how much we need to grow our allocations to the school. So we'll use that during that process. This budget development process is for restricted and unrestricted, our entire operating budget. It's inclusive of our non-operating budget as well. Our non-operating funds are used to record revenues and expenses for a specific activity. So it's a little bit different than our overall general fund or our general operating budget. It's not a part of the budget that's approved by the board, but it is included in our budget formulation process. So we still go through the same exercise at the same time for operating and non-operating. We then move into our requested cycle, which takes place beginning in December. And that's really where we shift our focus over to taking the board or taking the superintendent's proposed budget that we go through during the formulation process in the fall. And from there, the board has the opportunity to make amendments. We go through our public hearings and budget work sessions. And then a final decision is made to amend that proposed budget with any budget amendments. It's finalized by the board and then transmitted over to the county executive by the beginning of the month, by the beginning of March. Once it's then transmitted to the county, the budget is then included in the county executive's overall proposed budget for the entire county. So we're one of several agencies, obviously the largest agency of the county. And then they have their own process of going through their public hearings and their budget work sessions. Once it gets through that process and the county council approves the budget, which has to be done by the end of May, they then transmit that budget back to the board to reconcile the requested budget and the county council's approved budget. So that happens during the reconciliation and the approval process that you see here for April through June. Next slide. So our budget formulation process is starting right now, begins in the fall, and we start with our current estimated budget for 2024. So this fiscal year just began. We finalized the budget for this year, became effective July 1, and that is our starting point for establishing our base budget in 2025. The base budget methodology really kind of takes like an incremental approach because you are starting with your previously established budget, but we go through a very detailed process to evaluate not only our discretionary costs, which is our non-payroll costs, but our staffing costs. That's a major component of our overall budget. So we'll go through a detailed process to review all of our authorized positions that we have on hand, central office space. As I said earlier, we will set aside funding that will be allocated later on for our schools. But we are looking at a our central office or non-school-based positions on a very detailed, thorough basis. We will evaluate if there is a need for a program enhancement relating to our budget for either on the staffing side or on the discretionary side. And then we also may look at organizational changes during that time frame. While we use the current year's budget as a starting point, as I mentioned, it is a very challenging process to go through and evaluate what you have and understanding the need to reprioritize your programs, your activities, your investments to ensure that we're continuing to meet the academic and operational needs of the school system. So you're looking at what you want to be able to invest for the coming year, realizing that we have a pretty set revenue base. And so we have to make sure we're delivering a balanced budget. And we have to be able to make everything fit. So oftentimes there is a give and take in order to maintain that balanced budget and to fund those priorities that are still on strategy with the goals for the school system for the year. Next slide, please. So why do we start with staffing? This graphic here shows that our total approved budget for 2024, all inclusive, restricted and unrestricted, is around 80% of our budget. Obviously, that's a substantial part of our budget. When you look at it on the unrestricted side, so excluding our grants, it goes up to 85%. So that is by far the largest portion of our overall operating budget. Now, keep in mind, even though the staffing is a large component of it, and I just described the process that we go through in looking at our non-school-based positions, over 75% of our FTEs on the unrestricted side are school-based positions. So the remaining 25% is that smaller population that we're really looking at in detail in the fall during the spring timeframe. And we'll kind of go through that process to really evaluate and, as I said, determine and prioritize those different positions. The remaining non-school-based positions provide, various types of services and support, whether it's academic programming, support and guidance, school leadership, data analytics, and accountability, and then, of course, just general administrative and operational oversight to the school system. We're a multi-billion-dollar organization, and so you need to have a level of infrastructure in order to support the work that we do in educating our students. We also closely look at contractual services, which is another material budget category within our unrestricted budget. Between payroll and our contractual services, those two categories combined make up 95% of our total unrestricted operating budget. So in terms of really kind of looking at our budget, the focus are people and contractual services. That's going to give you that level of coverage. And again, it's a difficult trade-off because there's not a lot of give there when a great number of those costs are coming from the schools or supporting our schools. Next slide. So in addition to going through our process and looking at our costs within our central offices, staffing, discretionary costs, we also have systemic projections that we make for the school system as a whole. It was referenced earlier that we have some of our major purchases that are done through a lease purchase financing agreement. That includes our buses and non-bus vehicles, includes our textbooks, as well as our technology. And we're continuing to be able to fund the one-to-one devices for our students. So we'll go through a process of projecting what those costs will be for the coming year. We look at all of our utility costs and how they're trending, over years to determine what that projection may need to be for the coming year. For all of our positions that are filled, they are based off of actual salary and benefits for people in those positions. So those are real costs based off of people who are actually here and the benefit selections that they've made. For our vacant positions, however, we do develop an average salary assumption that's used to formulate what a fully loaded vacant position may cost. We have an assumption for salary and an assumption for benefits as well. So we kind of centralize, we go through that whole process to determine those average salary and benefit items. When it comes to our union changes in our union negotiated agreements, we budget for those centrally. So while we have all the positions dispersed throughout the cost centers where they reside and whatever the current salaries are for those employees, we know that every July 1, we're going to have additional union increments that would go into effect. And so we manage the budgeting for that or the projection for that centrally. And we keep those costs, within one area when we're developing our overall budget. And then I mentioned earlier, again, we have our SBB, our school-based budgeting process that we start in the spring, but we have to set aside funds for that pot during our proposed budgeting cycle. So we'll go through that process for our SBB schools as well as for our charter schools. Next slide, please. Over 50% of our revenues come from our state resources outlined in the blueprint funding allocations or funding methodology. Maryland attempts to reduce the amount of disparities in education funding by introducing or having a local wealth equalized ratio that feeds into the calculation of how the revenue is determined. So it's a component of enrollment. As I mentioned earlier, the enrollment for the current year will be used as the projection for the coming year. There's a per pupil allocation amount that's already predefined in the blueprint legislation. And then we have this wealth equalized ratio that factors into that. And we've got different revenue streams, but some of our more significant state aid programs are based off of this general revenue funding model. So we'll be able to use what's already been outlined in the legislation for the next 10 years to be able to do a high level projection of what we believe our revenues will be for fiscal year 25. But that wealth ratio is always a wild card because that's based off of tax returns that are submitted, and that information is not released by the comptroller until we get to December of this year. And so we won't have that data available until later on, and it's relative. So our wealth relative to the other counties in the state could vary, could change. So that is a variable that we don't really have the ability to have a good projection for, but we use a proxy as best as we can when we're developing our revenue projections at this time of year. Next slide. In addition to some of those major state aid programs, we also that are per pupil based, we also have some other funding sources as well on the unrestricted side that you see outlined here. We've got our transition grant, we get funding for transportation, we receive additional funding for transporting our students with disabilities. We do have some smaller revenue streams on our local side from board sources. So we have ancillary fees that we collect for students who are coming from other counties, renting out our building facilities, interest earned. We also have our county contribution towards funding our students. And so the major state aid programs that I referenced before, there is a state component and there's a local share component that's tied to those funding programs. So the county contribution is inclusive of that. The legislation and blueprint does outline relief that comes from the state in being able to fund that local share. So if it gets up to a certain amount, it's capped, and then the state will come in and subsidize and pay a portion of that local share on our behalf. And then the final component in kind of building out our unrestricted revenue model is looking at our use of fund balance, which is not something that we utilize for ongoing costs because it's more of a one-time, very used in isolation basis. It's not part of your ongoing operating revenue source. And so we have to be very careful on the use of our fund balance. Next slide here. So once we kind of get through the whole proposed cycle, revenues, projections, and make some assumptions around student enrollment data, we then get to the point where the superintendent presents the proposed budget in December, and that then starts the kickoff of the requested budget cycle for 2025. The budget book is released electronically and is available to all of our stakeholders and community members on our website. Once that's been released and been made available to the public, we then begin our requested budget cycle approval process with the board. And that consists of these three different phases you see outlined here. The first phase, Q&A, second phase, amendments, third phase is finalizing those board amendments and ultimately approving the budget. There's a whole process the board members will go through to review those amendments. Those amendments initially come through the OBAFA committee for review, discussion, and then the OBAFA committee votes on the amendments that will then move forward to the full board for final approval. And then at that subsequent meeting, Those board amendments will be voted on, decided upon by the full board, approved, and then ultimately a decision will be made to approve the overall requested budget for the year. There's a series of work sessions that are held throughout the year or during this requested cycle. We usually have 2 work sessions to kind of go through the Q&A phase with the board members. And then when we get to the final recommendation of the board amendments to the full board, that's usually done in a final work session before we ultimately approve the budget for submission to the county later on in the final meeting in February. As I mentioned earlier, the budget has to be transmitted to the county executive no later than March 1st. So we really do have a defined period of time in which that process, phase 1, 2, and 3 must be complete. So our board requested budget can be submitted on time. And of course, throughout this process, the community, there's a high level of community engagement. We've had great success in the last few years. You know, we've learned a few things. We had to do business a little differently because of the pandemic. And one of the things that has come out of that process is that we found that there's been increased participation with some of the work sessions and having them virtual, because you've got families who are, you know, at home in the evenings, cooking dinner, things of that nature, as opposed to them being in person. And so I believe that's still the plan for this year, that they will continue to be virtual to allow that flexibility. And we certainly encourage the community to come out and to the work sessions and to the public hearings to be able to share their thoughts and insights into the budget that's being considered. Next slide, please. So the other portion of the requested cycle, outside of the board going through the work sessions and the public hearings and kind of, you know, coming up with the requested budget cycle, it is a major time, a pivotal point in the budget development process. We received the updated state aid document from what the governor releases, you know, his budget in January. So that's a major defining point for us, because now we have a sense of what the state is going to be funding for each of the LEAs. Also at that time, we have confirmed enrollment numbers for the previous September 30th. That's used for revenue projections. We also received guidance at that point in time about the amount of funding that will be required for our state retirement. So that's a great time for us to be able to refresh and update our budget. So we go through this process in the proposed budget where we have a pretty good foundation of what we believe our revenue is going to be. We've delivered a balanced budget. You then go through the amendment process, and you're hoping that between alternatives and what's being amended or what's being suggested as an amendment and the revenue changes, that you don't have a budget gap. Some years we do, and then it requires a little bit harder work to kind of take a deeper dive to determine where we're going to make some cuts and adjustments in order to fund any impact to revenue, along with the ability to fund any possible amendments that comes out of that board process in February. We then get into our school budgeting season, late February into March. So we take that pot of money that was defined during the proposed cycle, and now we begin the process of allocating those funds down to the individual schools. The schools have the ability to go through and develop out their staffing plans based on the needs of that school. We have a few different types of staffing that we often refer to during the school budgeting process. We have our unlocked positions. Those are the positions that the individual schools, the principals, as they're going through and developing, they have their pot of money that's been allocated to their school. They can then determine what positions they want to purchase with their allocated SBB funds. So those are unlocked positions. Then you have your locked positions, and those are school-based positions that are managed and allocated centrally down to the school level. So an example of that would be special education positions, which are managed by the central office and then allocated to the different schools based off of IEPs, caseloads that need to, and we need to have staffing in order to support those students in the schools. And then we have what we refer to as locked plus positions. Those are the positions that allow the schools to, in addition to what they're in addition to positions that have been allocated to them as a locked resource, they can also augment that by purchasing a position as well. So that process takes place throughout the month of March, and we finalize our school-based budgets at that point in time. Next slide, please. So this here is just an overall visual of how you kind of the building blocks associated with developing their budget. Every school gets allocated a certain amount of base funding in order to cover the needs for their school. Same amount, every single student. In addition to that, there's an additional weighted amount that's allocated to the schools based off of the needs of the students in those schools. So we have grade level funding that we allocate for our early learners, kindergarten through third grade, to ensure that we have an appropriate ratio of small classroom sizes for our early learners. We have additional funding that's received for those students, populations, English learners in the schools. And then we have a component that's tied to student achievement as well. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have block staffing on top of that. Again, that's allocated from central office managed down to the school level. Next slide. And then finally, we get to the reconciliation phase, as I stated before, where we're going through and sort of reconciling the budget that was approved by the county with the requested budget from the board. But this is also another pivotal time during the budgeting process, because now General Assembly has completed their process for the year. We have a finalized budget from the governor, hopefully sometime this late by the time we get it. But we have a finalized budget. We now know with certainty what our revenue source is going to be. We often have a lot of changes to our grants that happen during this time frame as well. So some of the applications are coming through and being finalized. And so we'll go through and having to reconcile those changes and updates during this last final reconciliation phase before the budget is presented back to the board for approval in late June for it to become effective July 1. So that's a high level overview. And I know I kind of went through that quickly. The last couple of slides, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time in doing that. I think there's some value perhaps maybe at a later point in time and sort of talking through it. But it just provides, if you want to just click on it real quick, it provides an overview of really how to understand what's in our budget by looking at our budget book. And there's a great way to kind of navigate through it. It's a 300-page document. So it's a lot of information. And if you're not intimately familiar with it, it's like, where do I go to really understand the story of what's being presented in the budget? So the superintendent will present, a high-level overview of what that proposed budget actually is. But if you want to understand it in the budget book, you can get a bit lost. So the first 40 pages or so of the budget book really tells the main story of what's taking place in that proposed budget for the year. All the other sections allows the user or the reviewer of that information to dig deeper as they see fit. So there's just some tips on, ways to kind of navigate through the budget book. And we develop one for every phase of the budget cycle: proposed, requested, and approved cycle. So that is my presentation. Any questions?
Go ahead, Dr. Harris.
Hey, Chief Hal. Thank you for your presentation. I think a good resource that we use, last year, and we could potentially use this year as well, are the one-on-one board member sessions that we had for budget season. So that might be helpful for some of our newer board members and those that have questions. But I thank you for that presentation and keeping us up to date on what's coming next.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Howe, for the presentation. I wanted to know if you had any thoughts on how we might be able to basically take the contents of your presentation and sort of relay it to the public in maybe some sort of graphic way that could help them sort of understand those pieces that you mentioned, or if there would be a possibility for us to maybe have a meeting offline and we could talk a little bit about how we can relay the process to the public in a way that may be more accessible or easy for folks to understand that may not be as steeped in the acronyms and the language. I just wanted to kind of pick your brain on that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk with you offline about that. I think there's definitely some opportunities to increase community engagement throughout the process, and not just during the budget work sessions that happen in January, February, but starting now with, I know the board sends out the survey to their communities, and you're receiving that feedback. Superintendent House will be having his listening sessions September into October. That's a great opportunity for the community to be engaged at that point as well, because that's when we're actually formulating and working on our budget. By the time it's proposed, you really would hope that you've got feedback from board members and from the community and administration that kind of feeds into that proposed budget that's being presented at that point in time. And then to the extent that there's an opportunity to still maybe consider some additional amendments, perhaps there's some additional information or things we want to consider, there's that opportunity to do that as well. But we wouldn't want the work sessions or the public hearings in January and February to be the first time the community is really being made aware of some changes that are happening to the budget. So I think there's definitely an opportunity to get that engagement earlier in the process.
Thank you so much, Ms. Howell. I think that's going to be great for us to have a sit down and sort of think through some of your ideas there. I also just had a quick question under the contracted services. You said 13.5% of payroll budget or the total budget contracted services. It was on an earlier slide. And
yeah, so overall,
later on that.
On that slide that was displayed before, it had our total budget, which includes restricted and unrestricted. I like the kind of, I mean, that's a helpful graphic just to understand our total budget. But when it comes to actual formulation, I kind of take the restricted component out of it because those funds are restricted and used, and we don't really have the ability to kind of change how those funds are being used and budgeted. So on the unrestricted side, about 85% of our total unrestricted budget is tied to people costs, payroll and benefits. An additional 10% is tied to contractual services. So between payroll and contractual services, that makes up about 95% of the unrestricted operating budget. And so I know sometimes we get into the budget cycle and there's questions and folks just want to be able to understand movement and changes that are happening between lines and categories. But when you look at a multi-billion-dollar budget, you really want to kind of keep everything in perspective in terms of where the dollars are going. And when you consider how much of those costs are tied to the schools. And so the central office is obviously a necessary portion of that, but it's not the one that really is moving the needle in terms of where the costs are being spent. It's really supporting, obviously, as it should, our schools, our school-based positions, and our supporting our students. But there's also a lot of costs tied at the central office level as well that indirectly supports our students in terms of our academic programming, our school leadership. They're not necessarily housed at the school, but it's necessary in terms of the curriculum that's being developed and other initiatives that are being executed on behalf of the schools.
All right.
Madam Chair, I do have just a recommendation. We learned at the last board meeting that the PCAC would really like to be involved. And equally, our student board member had many suggestions related to engagement for our students. And as we are preparing them financially for their future, I do recommend that we really look at those two stakeholder groups to really work on our engagement strategies with including them in the process and educating them on the process. So it would be a path for parents as recommended by you, board member, but then also a path for our young scholars. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know Ms. Rivera Forbes has her thoughts are that we can send that budget priority survey actually out to students as well. And so I'm trying to see what is possible. Board members will be receiving their links. We have a QR code this year that we'll be sharing out. And we're going to ask all board members to work with PCAC members to get as many survey respondents as we possibly can. We're shooting for the thousands. So we really want to help us get that out there to really support the work that Ms. Howell and her team are doing. Okay, if there are no further questions, I just want to thank you to the budget operations teams for your presentations and engaging dialogue this evening. I want to move on to some follow-up and next steps. So the follow-ups from our items from the August 23rd, 2023 meeting have been posted on board docs. In our next Operations, Budget, and Fiscal Affairs Committee meeting will be held on Wednesday, October 18th, 2023 at 5 p.m. And so I actually wanted to make an amendment to my previous motion, and Ms. Guerrero, you can tell me if this is out of order, but I wanted to move that we have the resolutions to those recommendations by our next OBAFA meeting on October 18th, because I know it will have to go to our next board meeting. And so, Ms. Guerrero, is that an okay motion to make for those recommendations?
Could you clarify, is that what you guys voted on to provide to the board?
Yes, we voted
Could
for
you
those
clarify?
recommendations. We voted for the recommendations to go to the board. And so I wanted to add in that we would receive the answers to those recommendations by our upcoming OBAFA meeting on October 18th. So should I
That would
add
just
that
be
in?
considered a follow-up.
Okay,
It could be a follow-up
a follow-up, just a
to,
request?
yeah, just a request to administration.
Okay, so we'll just add that into the transmittal that we send over after this meeting. Okay.
That is correct.
All right, thank you so much. Again, I want to thank everyone for a great evening. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. We are adjourned. I appreciate your time this evening. Thank you to all the public that are here.